Hi, everyone, and happy Election Day. My name is Lauren Christella, and I'm the interim president and COO of the Committee of 70. Happily coming to you from Studio C70, our offices on Broad Street in Philadelphia. With me today is our former president and CEO, current chair of the Ballot PA initiative, David Thornburgh. Thanks for being here, David.
Of course, Lauren.
And while everyone is anxiously waiting for votes to come in and polls to close, we thought it would be a good idea to talk about who's not voting today. Pennsylvania is a notoriously closed primary state, and you're leading the effort to change that. Can you tell us a bit more?
Well, sure, Lauren. And yeah, happy Election Day. I hope everyone who didn't vote by mail is out busily headed to the polls or helping their neighbors get to the polls. As you know, Lauren, this issue was kind of identified, born and raised at the Committee of 70 a couple of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. As you pointed out, Pennsylvania is one of only 9 states that strictly shuts out independent voters from voting in primary elections. And we think it's time to change. And we think there's a path forward that will make that happen, that would bring back to the polls 1.1 million voters. And I say back because it's important for people to realize that up until 1937, you didn't actually have to be registered in a party to vote in primary elections. So it was only in 1937, for a variety of reasons that don't matter anymore, independent voters were shut out. So we want to bring them back. And to your question, it's really important to drill down and understand who we're keeping away from the polls. Most egregiously, 1 in 2 veterans consider themselves political independents. So the fact that we're keeping any veterans away from any elections, to me, is absolutely appalling. That we would ask people to put their lives on the line for this country and then say, oh, by the way, you can't vote even for your commander in chief is unconscionable. Second is, and you know this well, because 70's always worked with a lot of young people, young voters. About 57% of young voters identify as political independents. So once again, these are folks that we are counting on to, carry the torch for our democracy. They're getting engaged, and simultaneously we're saying thanks, but no thanks. You can't actually vote unless you toe the line and join a party. And then the third I'll point out is, and this is a real sort of a sleeper, Latino voters, Asian American voters, who, if you look at the demographics of Pennsylvania, that's who's building this Commonwealth. That's where the growth is coming from. And for a variety of reasons, those folks are more likely to be political independents. So once again, we're working at cross purposes. So there's many reasons that it's time for Pennsylvania to join the other 41 states. But I think those are 3 good ones, really drilling into who it is that we're shutting out and have been shutting out for 80 some years.
And to be clear, these voters are paying, their tax dollars are supporting these elections, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one that really gets people going, is recognizing that, statewide taxpayers pay about $75 million a year to support elections. So everybody's paying for it, but not everybody participates, which, somebody pointed out. I think there were some folks that dumped a little tea in Boston Harbor. Where you can't, sort of rifle shot. I want to, in this race, I want to vote for the Democrat, in this race, the Republican. And I'll point out, because sometimes we forget that the rest of the world moves somewhat faster than Pennsylvania. Folks in Massachusetts have been voting like this for decades. So they've got a well-oiled system down, whether you're voting by mail, where you indicate when you ask for your ballot which primary you want to vote in, or as you said, you show up. And just as they do today for primary day, right now they'll say, are you Democrat or Republican? That'll be a third question, which is, are you an independent? And if so, which ballot do you want to vote on? So, and we've talked to, better than I do, 70 really respects the work and the integrity of election directors. And we checked with about a half dozen election directors around the Commonwealth and didn't get any big blowback in terms of the mechanics. They said, well, if you give us enough time, this is about a 3 or 4 out of 10 in terms of the lift. So that gives us confidence that if we can get this bill passed, we can actually move pretty efficiently to get it done.
So what do you think the effect would be? Obviously increasing turnout, but how about on polarization?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're related. My somewhat back of the envelope estimate says this would bring about 10% more voters to primary elections. And we were keying off midterm elections. So when midterm between presidential elections. So more maybe in a presidential election. So 10% more. And then you say, well, who are those voters? And when you do research on independent voters, they are kind of eclectic. You know, there are folks that are, you would almost call libertarian, they're progressives, they're very conservative independents, but the best research that we found says about 3/4 of them identify as more moderate voters. So at a time when, you know, we are plagued in this country by the rhetoric and the vitriol of extremes on both sides, this would have the effect of kind of calming the waters. And you broaden the base with more moderate voters, and all of a sudden, candidates running because they want those votes are going to maybe turn down the volume and turn down the rhetoric. And frankly, when they get elected, they'll be more ready to govern because they've already had experience in listening to and courting the votes of a broader base of the electorate, which is, I think, at the end of the day, that's what we're after. We actually want folks to do something when they go to Harrisburg or Washington or county seats or city of Philadelphia or whatever. So, you know, and I'm careful to say it's not going to change the world. But to me, what's important to know is that this pushes, I think, Pennsylvania politics in the right direction.
And it's likely a tangible step in bridging that gap in trust that voters have because they watch the primaries. They see what the candidates say to gin up their base support, which is often the most extreme of both parties, right?
Yeah.
And then they have to tack to the middle for the general election. And then I think it does probably reinforce this message of you can't trust what they say or you can't hold a politician to what.
I mean, we're counting on, you know, kind of the incentives of, I'll call it democracy 101. When people run for office, they want to win. And they want to win, you know, a loud vote is just as good as a quiet vote. If you give them an opportunity, if you, again, expand the pool of votes that they can compete for, and they can compete for quiet votes or more moderate votes, and don't just have to play to the loud and angry votes, I think it's a productive path forward. It's again, trying to bake into the process incentives for people who want to govern and you know, work with people from other perspectives and persuasions to arrive at a good old-fashioned compromise.
So this all sounds very compelling. Obviously, we're supportive, but it's not a cakewalk, right? There is opposition to this.
Yeah.
What would you say the biggest criticism of opening our primaries would be, and what would you say to it?
Yeah. Well, number one, and this is, you know, again, baked into the political culture of Pennsylvania, is it's just a fear of change. You know, we have to recognize and maybe respect the fact that we're asking, you know, men and women who in the legislature who got elected by a certain set of rules to think about changing those rules. So, and you know, the politics profession is marked by people who are somewhere between cautious and paranoid. So you can understand that. And there is some fear. One of the things that we hear is really derived from the fact that folks don't quite understand what the bill does. There's a fear of like this free-for-all that all of a sudden Democrats will be polluting the Republican primary and Republicans doing the same. And in our view, this proposal actually makes it harder for that kind of, you know, we call them shenanigans in Philadelphia, we make it harder for those kinds of shenanigans will take place, because it's very clear that there's a set of voters that are called independent. They're not, Republicans masquerading as Democrats or whatever. So I think those fears are not well founded, but that's what we have to work through to get this done. And this proposal has been in front of the legislature for in each 2-year legislation for maybe 4 sessions. And it's tough because change is tough. But the way I look at it is it's kind of like the tide coming in. Tide doesn't come in all at once. Every session it comes a little further up the beach. And I'm confident that this might be the year when it comes all the way in. And we could have these in place for the 2024 presidential primary, which would be huge.
Would be enormous year, I would imagine. And who, if people want to get involved and support this effort, what are the best ways they can do
Sure. Yep. Ballotpa.org is the website. You can sign a digital petition, which allows us to bring you into the community and get you all educated about the issue and what you can do. I would also mention, and I'm from Pittsburgh, so that I have a little bit of a bias, but there's a wonderful video that is on the site by former Steeler great and Vietnam veteran Rocky Blyer, who was a childhood hero of mine, who makes like a spine tingling to me endorsement of this as a veteran and expressing his dismay that somehow inadvertently we're shutting out veterans from voting in primaries. So ballotpa.org, sign the petition, watch the website, and come on board.
Sounds great. We will be sure to put those links in the comment section. Spread the word. Anything else? Any final thoughts for the audience here?
No. Well, you and I have known each other a while. I know we both. Election day is a really special day, right? There's something about it. It's not Christmas or New Year's or whatever, but it's a special day. We have a beautiful day, I think, statewide. So in addition to voting, which everybody ought to be actively doing, this ought to be a day to ask ourselves, how's it going? And is there a better way that we could vote to bring more people into the mix, to bring about more competition, which is always healthy. So I would say to folks watching, when you're having a beer and you're watching the returns, just have a little chat with those around you on that question, like, how do we do this better? Like, what worked, what doesn't work? And I hope this whole notion of allowing independents to show up factors in, at least after the second or third beer, enters the conversation.
We certainly have recommendations even beyond opening primaries at 70.org. And for anyone who hasn't made their picks or headed to the polls yet, our ballot tool is also live. I'd be remiss without a plug for ballot.70.org. Everything you need to cast an informed vote. I noticed a little bit of a line, but only because people are checking in so quickly with the new e-poll books. And then the ballot is so long, right? So many choices to go through, things to double check. So give yourself a little time and enjoy the day. Thank you so much, David, for being here with us. And
sure, Lauren. Fight the good fight. See you soon.
Thanks so much.